Hi guys. We started by looking at letter forms and typography terms. From the letter, we moved to working with columns of type, which we're doing in our first major project. Um, I just want to go over a few terms and a few things to look for when you're setting type. Um, when you have a text in text boxes, um, it's typically we're putting in paragraphs. So, um, so sentences are grammatical units. Um, Paragraphs are more of a literary convention to divide masses of content into more palatable sections. Um, some of the ways that we use to separate paragraphs in graphic design, um, we'll often use paragraph breaks. Um, we will use indents, um, and those are the pretty much the main two. Um, a typical indent is about typically it looks to be about 3 spaces from the edge of your column. Um, so it's not very much, just enough to let us know that this is a change in the paragraph. Um, a proper uh, line break is actually not a, so in when you're working in Illustrator or InDesign, if you hit return, that builds in a full line break, which is a break in a paragraph. Um, when we're actually setting type, what we actually try to do is we're using sort of half that space. So if you look over to the right here, this shows a line break with half spaces. So instead of full returns, we set those so that they're half that. Then over on the left here, what you can see is what a proper indent looks like. And an indent, again, will replace a paragraph break. Either of them are workable, and typically I like to have paragraph breaks just because it gives the viewer a sense that there are some openings in the text and that it's not so daunting to read it. Um, there are a few other ways to do it. So this one down here is an outdent. So it's actually each paragraph hangs outside of the paragraph. It's not very common, and there's a good chance that you'll probably not use it very much. Now, once we put those paragraphs into your text boxes, um, we have control over how they read. So there's really kind of 4 different alignments. So we're just going to go over them. This one over to the left is centered text. So you'll see every line break that you do ends up centering the next line down the middle of the page. This is really effective if you're kind of doing some sort of notice. It can work for things like posters, um, uh, invitations. Often you'll see wedding invitations with centered type. So it's formal and it's classical. It invites the designer to break the text for a sense of um, creating elegant and organic shapes. Um, Really is for not huge amounts of text. So you wouldn't do an entire page in centered text. Now, justified text is over to the right, and justified text means that um, both sides of the paragraph forces the text to make it right to the edge of your text box. So some of the things you'll often see this in magazine and book design, um, newspapers. Ugly gaps can occur. because the text is forced into lines of an even measure, meaning that when you look at the space in between the words, so use of space, it also creates a clean, compact shape on the page, except these spaces in between the words get pushed so that every line looks the same. So it is a lot of work because you are forced to fix some of those words. So that's centered and justified. Now, the most common, excuse me, the most common alignment that you're going to use is flush left. So we call it flush left. Some people will refer to it as set left, flush left, ragged right. But really what it means is at the end that your text box makes it to a certain point, and each line has a slightly different length based on how many words are in the paragraph. So when you look at this one, it says in flush left, ragged right text, the left edge is hard and the right edge soft. So when you look at this word hard, it doesn't quite fit up here, so it moves to the next line. However, on the next line, do not fits in that space where hard would not fit here. So we have a line in and a line out. And as you go down the page, you can sort of see it alternates back and forth. It doesn't have to be a perfect rag. So what we call this, when you look at the visual edge of the paragraph, that's your rag. So you will hear that a lot. So what we try to do with the rag is you can adjust it once you're finished a document. You can adjust it, and what you're after is sort of a line out, a line in, a line out, a line in, a line out, and then alternating. But it doesn't necessarily have to be that stringent. So you can have like one line, like two lines a little bit longer, then a line in, then a line in, then a line out. So designers try to strive to create the illusion of a random natural edge without the use of excessive hyphenation. Hyphenation means when a word is split in two. So up onto one line, down to the next line. And finally, flush right, ragged left is when the type is exact opposite. So flush right text can be obviously it's a departure from set left. It's fine when you're using things like captions or sidebars, all other small things, but you don't really want to set major text in set right because it's annoying for the reader to try and read the line, then figure out where the next line starts. So we use it for very small portions of things like captions and things like that. We set type depending on the length of the paragraphs and the length of your columns. There are some unintended results that you often have to fix. So we talked a little bit about having a nice rag on a set left document, but also how the words end the paragraphs as well. So we're just going to talk a little bit about orphans and widows. So basically an orphan and a widow is a sort of unintended result of a word or a short line hanging off the edge of your paragraph. So if you look here, this word all couldn't fit in this line, and it's ended the text box with one word hanging out there. That word is called the widow because it's sort of it's missing any other line. So we try and avoid things like that. Now what goes with a widow is an orphan. So an orphan is a little bit the opposite. So it's when you're setting your text and the text flows and you end up with one word sitting by itself before your next paragraph. So again, those are ways, that's exactly things that we'll be trying to avoid and fix. So a lot of times that's slightly adjusting our line lengths or manually going in and changing our line spacing or leading. In that, those are ways to sort of fix those types of things. When you're setting type in a column, um, there are different line lengths that we try and aim for. So that's referred to as line length or column width. So the length of the line or the width of the column. Um, ultimately, a good line length is around 9 to 12 words on a set left paragraph. Um, it can be more, it can be less, but this is sort of an example of 3 paragraphs where you can make your columns too narrow. And sort of a rule of thumb that I always think about is if my columns are so narrow that it only holds 3 words, then that's too narrow. Um, this next one is a pretty nice line length, so it's relatively 9 to 12. And the next one down has just gotten a little bit too long. So it takes a lot for the reader to follow all the way around and then have to switch and come back here. So this one probably would be great if it was probably 3 to 4 words shorter, and it would be fine. So those are things to think about when you're actually building your column. So today's exercise, you're going to take this big messy document that I provided with you, and the headline is going to be called classifications, and you'll see that there's all sorts of text on here. I built some columns for you. The idea with this exercise is to show examples of each one of the headings. So you'll see we have these paragraphs called flush left, flush right, centered, justified. We have all these different definitions of areas of the letter. We have widows and orphans. We have kerning. So all of those you're going to turn into an interesting layout. So you're going to try and line up your columns of text. You're going to create examples of what the heading is saying. So if I'm talking about a widow, then what I'm going to do is I'm going to set up my type, and then I'm gonna make an example of it. So there we go, and then flush right. I'm going to set it in flush right. So you're going to show examples of all of these things, and you can absolutely refer back to thinking with type or any of the other ones. You're also going to show 10 examples of different areas of the letters, and it doesn't have to be the ones that I've selected here for you. You're going to basically set this up also in an interesting way. So we're going to use classifications as our headline. So you can absolutely add color to it. But what I'm looking for is alignments with the type. So our columns should line up. Okay, guys, on the second page of your document, we are going to just do some really basic stuff that I'm going to take you through. So I want you to set up different areas that are going to give us white space. So when I talk about white space in design, it's typically the space that doesn't have anything in it. So you can sort of see if I look at our destined for destined layout, the white space would be sort of this area in here. This area gives your eye a rest. The space in your margins. So when we look at a layout, we always want to have some sort of white space. So I've set up my 3 columns of text. I put in some paragraph breaks, which is what you're going to do. Now, when I set up my 3 columns of text, you can see that my line lengths are pretty good. So we're relatively at about 6 or 7 words. Now there's some areas in here that you're going to hear me talk about, which I just want to go over. So you can see I've set up 3 columns of text. So anytime you see text in a long text box, we call it a column. Then in between each column of text, there's a space so that we don't accidentally think that this text belongs to this text. So those are called gutters. So the gutters, you want to build them so that visually it's enough space that you understand that these are 3 different columns of text. Now, when you set up your guides here, these are margins. So here I have a margin of 1 inch. On this side I have a margin of 1 inch. I'll adjust it at the top so it's more than 1 inch, and then at the bottom I can put another guide down here that's 1 inch. So the space between the paragraphs, gutter, columns of text, margins are your guides, and white space is the area that gives the reader an opportunity to sort of let their eye have a break. So a few of the other things that you're going to do on this document. So you're going to set up 3 columns of text like this. You will put in some paragraph breaks. You will get the text from typing in lorem ipsum in your web browser, and you can generate lots of text from there, copy it, and then paste it into your text boxes. So some of the other things that you're going to hear me talk about when we're talking about setting type is we have 3 columns of text. The text in these columns is called our body copy, because it really is it's the body of our story. So when you look at some of the other areas, you're going to hear me say sometimes intros to stories. So intros to stories are typically taking the first paragraph of the story, and usually the first paragraph of a story often summarizes what you're going to get in the actual story itself. So a lot of times what we'll do is we'll go in and we can make that text slightly bigger if we want to. So if this is 8.5, this is I've changed this to 10 and I've gone bold. So once you have your introduction, put it in a text box. That intro text can look a little bit different than your body copy. So in this case, I have it going across 2 columns, which is perfectly okay, and I'm giving it a little bit of space. You want to have some space in there so the reader understands that there's they can actually see a little bit of white space, and there you can see that there. So this you could have it like this. You can tighten it up a little bit like this. You might decide that you only want to have an intro that does 1 column of text, and that's okay too. It's just a little bit different because you have a lot more text in here. So if you were going to do that, you could do something like that. But the other thing that you could do too is you could simply take your first paragraph and you could simply bold it, and that would become your introduction as well. So that's another way to do it. Or you could have your introduction a little bit closer to your title than your actual than the body copy itself, and that's okay too. So if I set up my headline and change it so the headline is relatively fitting in two columns, then I start getting areas on my document where there's a little bit of white space, more white space. Um, we've set up our margins and columns. So then as you read through the story, what you want to try and do is set the type so it basically gets to the end of, so the three columns are relatively the same length. So we can adjust our columns until, and then you see, okay, now they all actually evens out. One of the other things that you can do when you're setting this much copy is sometimes it's nice to break up the text itself visually so the viewer has an opportunity to sort of skim the document and not feel like it's so much copy. So sometimes you'll hear me say use a pull quote. So a pull quote is typically a quote. It doesn't necessarily have to be a quote from a person. It could be something about the story. So it could be written about. It can be original text that talks about something in the story, or it could also be a part of the story that gets pulled out and used again. So a lot of times you will see a pull quote, at the top of a column. We wouldn't necessarily have it at the bottom of the column because that would be where the story, you need to have a place where the story ends, and you need to end the story with body copy, not with a pull quote. A pull quote is something that you're going to skim, and it's going to highlight a certain part of the story, but yeah, it certainly doesn't go to the end. So, and again, you'll have to adjust your columns so they don't go too far, too close to the bottom. So you want to give yourself some space down there. So now I've sort of adjusted it. My text just about makes it to the end, which is okay. And then when you're putting in a pull quote, I often use them to readjust how much copy I have. So if I had a story that was a little bit short and I needed to get the copy to the end of the story, I might use a pull quote to take up some space. And a pull quote really can end up anywhere, but when you're placing a pull quote, you want to go under object, text wrap, and then go text wrap options, and you want to sort of look at like 3 points or 4 points and giving it a text wrap. What that means is as you move the text box, it's going to push and it's going to make other text wrap around it. Now, so since we're doing that, we want to have relative even spacing when we put the pull quote in. So I'm just going to go over a few visual things. So if I say I have my pull quote at the top of the column, as an interesting thing to do sometimes is actually have the pull quote break out of the three columns. So you can sort of see everything lines up really nicely. And then here I let the pull quote actually extend out over the page. I don't want to get it too close to the edge, but a little bit is okay. Now the next thing you want to worry about is how much space after there is. So you want to visually. So if I say, well, with this pull quote, I'm actually going to have it stay in the column and it's going to be within the text. So you can sort of see when you put it within the text, you want to make sure you have the same space above as you have below. So I'm going to make sure that this is nice and tight. So it's relatively the same as up here. Now, when you look at, and I adjust it going up and down, you can see how it'll push lines as the top gets to the next line, it'll push it down. So when you visually look at that, the problem that you have right here is there's just not enough white space above and below it. You want to make it perfectly clear that there's a break in the body copy, then there's a pull quote, then there's another break. So under this one, I'll go to my text wrap options, and I am going to change that a little bit. I'm going to open it up to 7. So now you can see that there's a little bit more space. We probably want even more space than that. Um, But what we don't want is we don't want this column to be affected by the pull quote. So you want to have lots of space in there. Another way to do a pull quote is called inset pull quote. So if you look at this one, I'm going to make this quite narrow, but not so narrow as to only have like 3 words on a column. And just to make sure, with this pull quote, I'm going to make it, I'm going to make it slightly smaller because I'm going to have a very small column of text for this. So I'm going to bring this down to the same size as the body copy, but it's going to be bold. Now, when I do that, I can actually set this and adjust the space in here and in here. And now, when you look around, if you look at the space on each side, it actually needs to be more. So I'm going to go Object, Text Wrap, Options. So I'm going to see what happens when I make that 15. So what you want to do is you want to make sure that when you do this, you're not accidentally distorting your text. So when you check it, you want to check 100% up here and 100% here. Now, you want to inset it so there's enough text above it. You want to set it right in between, center it right in between your gutter. And that would be another way to do it. So you have to be very careful as to make sure that you're not down to 3 words in a column over here or 3 words over here. So there's a lot of different ways to do pull quotes. So on your second page of this exercise, you're going to do a couple things. You are going to set 3 columns of text. You're going to inset a pull quote. You're going to adjust your columns so that it basically reaches the end. You're going to build your margins. You're going to build your gutters. You're going to have an introduction and a headline. And lastly, sometimes when we start a story, you can start a story sometimes with something that's called a drop cap. So you see how the very beginning of my story, the first word is L, first word is lorem. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take that L, and that's going to become a drop cap. So it's going to introduce the story. So I take it out of there, and basically this L becomes the first letter of the story. So a drop cap can work in a lot of different ways. So you can have it within your column of text, and then you sort of give it some space. So what you're after is you want the drop cap to sit on the baseline of your text. You also don't want it to extend above your, really it should be around your X height of your body copy. So that when we get rid of our guides and have a look, that's not bad, but I could actually open that up even more. So that's a little bit better. So now we have some white space in here. We have knocked out a line here. So that's not a bad drop cap at all. The other thing is I don't necessarily have to use the same weight of type. So I might actually go up and make that bold to get